Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. It looks like we are once again gonna be exploring deep within the woods. These viewers sent in some stories that they claim to be true. Now, once again, it is up to you whether or not you believe them. I'm not trying to convince anybody. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether or not it's in the woods or somewhere else, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this channel going. Now, without further ado, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and get comfy, because these stories will surely freak you out. I was spending the summer at my grandfather's house in rural North Georgia in the mountains. It was the summer between the 9th and the 10th grade, so I was 13 or 14 at the time. There are woods behind his house, and it's a good distance between my grandfather's house and any neighbors, but not that far. You can see one in the winter when the trees are barren, and the other is only obscured by a hill. Grandpa told me not to go wandering off into the woods though, on account of there being snakes and such during the summer. Well, one day I decided to go into the woods anyway. I start walking, and after about 10 or 15 minutes of walking, I realized that I've walked farther than I should have. As said, the woods weren't that big, but I couldn't see any of the neighbors' houses, or any landmarks or features I recognized. I went down the hill in front of me, thinking I'd see the neighbor's house. But I found myself standing between two hills. There was another hill in front of me, some rocks to my left, and some fallen trees to the right. I walked toward the fallen trees because to the right should be the edge of the forest, but I couldn't see the end of the forest. When I turned around to go toward the rocks, I saw this light grayish thing. I think I thought it was an animal, but when I try to remember it, it just looks like a fuzzy gray blur. But I remember that I felt calm for a few seconds, and it felt like time stopped, and I wanted to go toward it. Then, I noticed a person behind it, but on the hill. The quote-unquote person, however, was like a white featureless silhouette. Not wispy like a ghost, but solid and white. Then I saw another white silhouette but closer, and I could make out features. It kind of looked like a stormtrooper. It had two black eyes and a gray circular mouth, and when I saw it, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread and fear. I felt like I was having a panic attack. I ran as fast as I could up the other hill back the way I had come. What's weird is when I remember walking for like 10 or 15 minutes, but it seemed like as soon as I turned and ran back up the hill, I was immediately back at my grandfather's house. A couple of years ago, I was visiting again with family, this time during the fall for Thanksgiving. I decided to go out one day and try to find that spot again. I set out the same way I had 6 years prior toward that hill. Only a few minutes in, I walked over the hill when I came up to an old fence that separates my grandfather's yard from the neighbors. The second hill simply wasn't there. Neither were the rocks or the fallen trees. The whole part of the woods just wasn't there anymore. It didn't take nearly as long as I remembered. Does anybody have any thoughts or similar experiences to this? Did I lose time? What happened to me? This has been my most recent attack from what I believe is a spirit. I have been attacked several times. However, it has all been inside my own home. I'm used to that. It has settled down much more in the past 2 years. Anyways, at the beginning of last year around March, I was with my best friend and her boyfriend that she had just started dating. Knowing that they just started dating, we all wanted to hang out so I could meet him. Our town has many various large neighborhoods and communities, and he lived in a different one than ours. this one being outside of town. He takes us on an adventure to his wooded area that we didn't know about. I barely met him, but since he was my best friend's boyfriend, I trusted him. He did not know at the time that I am able to sense and see spirits sometimes. I'm mostly audio clairvoyant. I think that's what it's called anyway, when you mostly just hear them. As we walk deeper, it's pitch black, and we're using the flashlights on our phones and we get lost. On our way trying to get back, I feel like we're getting almost chased by something. I'm in the back, her boyfriend is leading. I already sense that we're being followed by something. I tell them to hurry because I'm in the back feeling like someone is about to grab me when someone behind me hisses and pushes me to the ground. I scream so loud, and I never scream when I'm scared, making them both book it and leaving me behind. I catch up to them because I can see their lights. We go into an opening where I can see the back of someone facing away, and you can just tell that it's not human or safe. We try again for a way out of this path we're in, but I see a white figure waving its hand for us to follow him. I tell them to leave, so we still follow the boyfriend, and we finally made it out. Turns out my best friend saw something push me and heard the hiss. She told me her theory was that it was something that was trying to lure us, or maybe possess us. I have so many experiences, but I'm very excited to share here. To me, this wasn't as brutal of an attack compared to my past ones, but being pushed down was pretty scary. That was the most force that I felt from a spirit even until this very day. This story takes place during the summer when I was 15 years old. This is a very true story about a small encounter I had. I was living with my dad and stepmother at the time. I remember my stepmother throwing a royal fit about buying me new school clothes because I had let a few pairs of pants get holes in them and still wore them. It was my first year going into high school, and I wasn't going to let her spoil that for me, so I went to stay with my grandparents for the summer to earn some money. They live in a remote, small area that was once home to many native tribes, most prominently the Quinault tribe. It's very secluded, despite being only a mile or so away from the highway, and it's all lush, gorgeous forest. My grandpa had built his own 3-story house and a shop where he cut and assembled cedar into roofing products. That's where I came in, hauling heavy chunks of cedar to his van. Stacking, nailing, cinching up shake and shingles into bundles to be sold. I made good money while there and was able to buy an entirely new wardrobe. As summer was coming to an end, it was too hot to work. I decided to take a walk one day. Now let me say that I spent my childhood roaming these woods, armed with my grandparents' 2 dogs. We ran and played and napped all day, and I had never seen anything out of the ordinary or gotten any weird vibes. I waited until it was a bit cooler in the evening and started out. Walking a little path I had to take out of the old unused logging road. I had tread this same path so many times that I wasn't even paying attention until I felt like I was being watched. I would like to note here that I was young at the time. I had yet to touch drugs or alcohol, and I have no history of hallucinations or mental illness along those lines. What I saw still haunts me to this day. There he was, standing naked in the middle of my path, looking down at me with a blank expression. He was tall, maybe 7 feet tall, much taller than my 5 foot nothing. He had long, matted black and gray hair. There were tufts of something growing from the sides of his arms and legs as well. Maybe that was also hair. It was kinda hard to see. There were no genitals, only smooth flesh where they should be. And his skin, it was such a sickly pale yellow and looked to be too big for stature, and it kind of hung in some spots. We made eye contact. His yellow orbs felt like they were staring into my soul. I couldn't move or think. Everything had gone silent around me. The next 10 or so seconds of my life seemed to stretch out. We just stood there, looking at one another before he swiftly turned and walked back into the trees. The foliage went undisturbed as he melted through it and disappeared. I honestly expected him to charge me or at least be intimidating, but he just turned and left. I haven't seen him or anything like that since, nor am I too enthusiastic to go out looking. I remember telling my grandma about it, but she told me it was probably just drug addicts as the area she lives in was, not the best. There were a lot of manufacturers of methamphetamine in the area, apparently. At least that's how the rumor goes. I told this story in a thread somewhere before, but I've never actually gone out of my way to share it on a show before. I've tried looking into Native American folklore, especially the local stuff, but haven't found anything matching that description. If anybody has any idea what this could be, please comment down letting me know. I would very much appreciate it. And thank you for sharing my story on your show, Swamp Dweller. Hello again, Mr. Swamp Dweller, it's me, Jean from France. I wanted to share another story from my family. This one is from my older brother Julian. He asked me to translate it, so here it is. In Haffel housing unit lived me, my 2 younger brothers and my parents. It was very crowded. I and my brothers had to share a small room. I didn't even get a bed. I had to sleep on a camping cot. On top of this, my parents were going through a divorce. It was a very high-stress time for us, so I and my brothers retreated into books and movies. Somehow, at 11 years old, I thought I could find me and my brothers a new home, like in the movies and books. I remember a particularly bad night, either in June or July, when my mother was yelling at my dad for something. My dad told us to stay in our room and not come out until morning, so we knew this was our chance. While my parents were shouting, I slipped out the window. Jean-Paul and Leon helped me down. We tied sheets together, like in the movies and comics we had read. We lowered down a small pack of supplies in a leather sack. Then Jean and Leon crawled into their beds and pretended to sleep. Me and my friends love the outdoors, so I decided to start my search for a new home in the woods. I thought I could build a little treehouse somewhere and live with my 2 brothers. How hard could it be? So I hopped on my bike and rode off. Like a fool, I hadn't thought to steal any food or water for my journey. That said, we were just kids and not very smart kids at that. So by the time I reached the trees, I was very hungry, thirsty, and tired. Inside my bag was my coat, a flashlight, a wristwatch, and a pocket knife. I think it was around 11. Ditching the bike, I head out into the woods. The day before it had rained, so the ground was very soft and muddy. My socks were caked with mud, and my shoes were completely ruined. I was covered in bug bites but was determined to find a new home. Eventually I grew tired. I trudged towards a small hollow tree stump atop a small hill, sat down and passed out, still clutching the flashlight and pocket knife. The tree stump was old, with a bunch of mushrooms around it. In the silver moonlight, it looked like it belonged in a movie set. Maybe I slept for an hour, or even less, but the next thing I remember was waking up in a panic. My chest burned like I couldn't breathe. For whatever reason, I knew I had to get water. Like a bat out of hell, I took off. My coat caught on a branch, so I left it there. The tiredness I'd felt left instantly. I wasn't a very active kid, but I must have run like the wind. It was almost a deep, feral feeling. I had to get running water. I barely remember the run. My hands were red from being slapped with twigs and leaves. My legs hurt as I'd never thought they could. I was being hit on all sides by branches and sticks. The flashlight must have fallen out of my hand at one point, but I gripped the knife tight. A side note, please don't run through the forest at night with a knife in your hand. It's dangerous and reckless. Now back to my story. I don't remember at what point this was, but I ran into a river. The cold water woke me up instantly, biting my ankles and making me shiver. Whatever panic I felt was gone now, washed away with the current. I crawled out of the riverbank on hands and knees crying. I was safe. It took me another hour to stumble my way to a road and wave down a car. They drove me back home, and I have never been happier to be scolded by my parents. When I fell asleep beside that old tree, I think I mustn't have noticed the mushrooms that made a full circle around me. Since I had no girls for friends, I was not well versed in the lore of the Fae, but now I almost think I fell into a Fae ring, or whatever they are called in English. Maybe a good Fae scared me awake, or maybe the fear came from the ring itself. Either way, crossing that river saved my life. Some background before my story. At the time this happened, I was 17, but I am 25 now. It was a week before Thanksgiving, and me and my best friend, who I will call Charlie, and his brother and dad went on a hunting and camping trip. The drive there was honestly creepy. There were big trees on all sides of the road in and out, and it was quiet when we got to our spot and set up camp. We got our gear and went out to hunt. I went with Charlie to one of those camouflage boxes that fit 2 people in it, but we had to climb up the tree to get in it. We were given radios, top-of-the-line gear, and after a few hours, it started getting dark. Me and Charlie were about to head back, but Charlie stopped me, and he took aim at something about 20 feet in front of our location. I looked through the binoculars to where he was aiming, and we saw what looked like a deer. He got excited and was about to shoot it when something big and fast took the deer. In shock, we didn't know what had happened until we, like idiots, left the tree thing to where we saw the deer. When we got to the spot, there was just a bloodstain on the ground. Scared, we booked it back to camp as it got darker. When we got to camp, Charlie's brother and dad were already there making dinner over the fire. They asked us what's wrong and why we were running. But before I could say anything, we all froze because we heard the loudest and deepest howl I've ever heard. And after I felt the ground shake and heard something was running in the woods after us, we all grabbed our guns, which was a mix of rifles and shotguns, and headed in the direction of the running, when all of a sudden the footsteps stopped and it went silent. You could have heard a pin drop, it was so silent. The deer we saw got taken earlier all of a sudden fell from a tree. When I looked up, all I saw was 2 bloodshot eyes. We snapped out of our frozen fear when Charlie's brother shot at the eyes, and then on reflex we all started shooting at the eyes and it disappeared. We left all of our camping gear and just took our guns and got in the truck and took off back to the nearest town, which was roughly 2 hours away. The next day we went back, and when we got back to our spot, our campsite was trashed. We looked at the tree where the eyes were, and we saw the tree was chipped and broken from our shots. We also saw blood on the tree, and on the floor under it. To this day I have nightmares about those bloodshot eyes. We all agreed to never tell anyone, but I had to share this. So I live in Estes Park, Colorado, and about 2 months ago, me and a friend climbed a mountain called Mount Olympus. At the time, there is a 50-foot cliff you gotta climb to get to the top. It's the same on all sides of the mountain. We got to the top and we found an elk, but it was dead. Its head had nothing on it, no skin, blood, nothing. I took it with me, but the body and different parts were found scattered around and had meat, blood, and fur on them still. We had found a leg about 20 feet away. The strange thing is how it got up there. Elk can't get up that high. Mountain lions definitely cannot drag it up there, and neither can bears. We headed down the mountain around 7 p.m., so it was late. I had my sword and my friend had my knife. We started running down the mountain. About halfway down, we smelled something terrible. It smelled like rotten eggs. We heard a log snap in half very close by. It was dark, so we couldn't see much. We had only the flashlights on our phones. We smelled that stench until we got to the field at the bottom of the mountain. What was strange is we didn't smell it going up the mountain. When we got to the field and we started walking back to the car, we had a terrible feeling of being watched. Like on the inside, we knew someone or something was watching our every move. Anyways, we got home with no problem. Then 2 nights ago, something very strange happened. My window is 10 feet off the ground, if not more, and we had snow on the ground. I was on FaceTime with my friend at about 12 at night, and all of a sudden I hear a slow scratching on my window. I grabbed my AR-15 and loaded it. I kept the AR-15 aimed at the window. It wasn't a bird because the scratch was slow and lasted over 10 seconds. It was deliberate. I had my dog with me, who is an ex-police dog, and she had her ears up, growling out the window. If it was a bird, she wouldn't do that. She never growls at anything but bobcats or bears. Never deer or anything like that. Nothing else happened that night. In the morning I went outside and found there were no tracks in the snow, and so I went inside and looked at the window, and there were 3 scratch marks about 5 inches from each other running parallel across half of my window. What do you guys think it was? I'm thinking a Wendigo, but I'm hoping it's not. If you would like, I could send in pictures of the skull and my window and how far off the ground it is. Let's just start off with my life story. I live in northeastern Pennsylvania in the Appalachian region, which is very famous for its cryptid and scary stories. When I was younger, I heard a story of an odd, unidentified animal in the region, so I took things into my own hands and went to explore the local woods. I went about a mile into the thick brush of the Pennsylvania backwoods. It was about 4:30 in November, which means it was starting to get dark already. So I traveled for a little more and went back to go to my cabin when I felt a very weird sensation. It felt like something was watching me. I let this feeling go because Pennsylvania has a lot of wildlife, and some like to be around humans for whatever reason. So I just assumed it was a coyote or a deer or something that could have been watching me. Then, about halfway back to my cabin, I hear this eerie scream from deep in the forest and some snapping of branches. I started to walk a little faster, as this was a very uncommon experience. I got just a couple of minutes from my house when I heard running up behind me. I turned around and about 10 yards from me was this giant humanoid creature, standing right in the dirt road. It was about 8 feet tall and had yellow eyes and had fur all over its body, almost like a Sasquatch, but it wasn't muscular like one. I know this creature was real because of that scream it made. I bolted back to my house and called the local game commission, and they said that another story like this had been reported the year before. I will never forget this story. I love your channel. I've been listening for a while when I remembered a story from when I was just a child. So this story takes place in Arizona. My mom had married a man who was of Native American descent. So I went to go meet them, and when we got there, he introduced us to his mother and his cousin Sean. He was 16 at the time and I was only 13. He asked me if I wanted to camp outside tomorrow night. We agreed, and the next day went into the attic. We got tents and brought some food. We went to find our spot, and soon enough, we did. After 3 hours, we set everything up. Sean and I shared a tent, and my stepdad and mom also shared a tent. When nighttime rolled around, we were getting ready to go to bed when we smelled something horrible. It smelled like fresh metallic and rotting meat. We covered our noses with our shirts because it was so bad. Sean barfed on the tent, and the animals around us went very quiet. Everything was quiet. The smell eventually went away, so Sean cleaned up the puke from the tent, and we got in and fell asleep. I woke up at about 3 a.m. I sat there trying to fall asleep, but it was no use, so I got up and went to go pee. When I was done, I got back in the tent, when once again everything went quiet and the smell returned. That's when I heard footsteps circling the tent, so I unzipped the tent just enough so I could see. That's when I saw the most terrifying thing ever. It was a deer, but its fur was rotting off and you could see its rib cage. That's when it turned and I saw it had no face, just a skull and no eyes, just black holes. I laid down trying to fall asleep. That's when I looked at my watch and it was 5:56 a.m. The sun was coming up, and that's when I realized I could get a better look at this beast. I looked out the hole and it was gone. All that was left were footprints which started out as deer hooves and changed to what I think are coyote paws. This thing had to be at least 7 feet tall. I got out of my tent and looked around, but I saw nothing, so I went to sleep again. That was 20 years ago, and I'm still scared of this experience. Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true deep woods stories. These stories, as always, were sent in by viewers just like you. It's up to you whether or not you believe them. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. But if you would like to share your own story on the show, be sure to submit those at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going. If you enjoyed these stories, please do me a favor and hit that like button, as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you're not aware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and just about every other podcasting platform you can find. I appreciate you guys supporting the swamp the way you guys always do. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, I really do appreciate that. If you could, comment down below, Jeepers Creepers, to let me know that you made it all the way to the end, and to confuse anybody who didn't. I love seeing how original you guys get with these little replies in the comments. Thank you guys, once again, for always supporting the swamp and doing everything you do for me. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.